Sangye Chodan Soki Shonam La Shenjo Bardu Dane Kyapsuchi Daki Jinsoji Pas Sonamgi Drola Pincher Sangye Druparsho Drola Pincher Sangye Druparsho Drola Pincher Sangye Druparsho Samchin Tamchi Dewa Tandewa Gurun Demargurchi Dungan Dungan Gurun Tawagurchi Dungan Mewa Dewa Tamitra Wagurchi Nieran Charanila Nebetonyola Nepagurchi Oma Sobo Washodo Savadama Sobo Washodo Tompa Ni Tu Kyor. Thank you all so much for coming, and from my side, very wonderful to be here in the Jewel Heart Center in Ann Arbor. And it's part of my tour of half a dozen of the Jewel Heart Centers in the States. It's presently, I think, a little bit of a traumatic time for peoples around the world, especially North America, with this coronavirus, the crown-shaped virus coming from Wuhan, or thought to come from Wuhan, sometimes referred to as the Chinese Wuhan virus, simply because it's a new phenomenon. Until now, it hasn't at all equaled any of the terrible viruses of the past, like the swine flu or any of those, but hopefully will not go in that direction. And I wondered what I should speak about this time. Sunday is kind of an open mic forum, sort of like anything relevant goes kind of situation. And I thought, because this was where Kyabji Gelek Dorji Chung spent many of the last couple of decades of his life, Ann Arbor he chose as his root center, you could say, or his home center, and visited the others. So this one is a little bit special in that way. And when Rinpoche became a little bit older, he saw his transitioning to next life coming nearer, he started inviting the great Demo Tulku from India, and hoping that the Demo Rinpoche would do a wonderful job nursing the centers from where Kyabji Gelek Dorji Chung had established them, and nursing them into the future in ways appropriate to the needs and predispositions of modern peoples. I thought, what would be a good way to do, what would I speak about along those lines? And I remember the very first of the 20 or so books I published with Snow Lion in I think, in New York, was a book at the time we brought out as Songs of Spiritual Change. It was actually the first book that Snowline published completely by their own, from scratch, so to speak, like making pancakes from scratch as opposed to an Aunt Jemima pancake mix. They had done a couple of books before that, but they were basically reprints of books that had been published by Allen and Unwin in England and gone out of print. And they essentially just made photo offset reproductions of those. So mine was really the first, Songs of Spiritual Change, by the set of songs and poems related to Lamrim and Lojong, was really the first book they published from scratch. And this is a set of about, 20 or 5 or so, 20 or 30 songs and poems, as they're called, Lojong Tang Sigche, Nyamgur Tang Sigche. Nyamgur means songs of experience, enlightenment songs, and Sigche, verses of advice or lines of advice, written by the seventh, either at request of various of his students, and or else just spontaneous expressions from him. And the one I thought to use here today, to refer to here today, was a song that he spontaneously composed for the sixth demo Tulku. It's in the biography of the seventh. It's said that when the fifth demo Tulku passed away, the seventh Dalai Lama took great care in looking for the reincarnation, the search for the reincarnation, enthronement of the reincarnation, and then the training of the young sixth demo. And that he made sure that whenever he himself, the seventh Dalai Lama, gave a major teaching, that sixth demo was given front row seating. I think sometimes they do with that with tulkus, young tulkus, to be sure they don't mischievously drift off to sleep or start playing, these days, video games. Probably in those days, some other kind of distraction that young tulkus will play with one another if not seated in the front row. But this is stated in the seventh Dalai Lama's biography that he took very close care of the young sixth demo. And it actually doesn't say sixth demo, the young demo. And so it would seem that him saying that in that way, that the seventh from the very beginning understood that this demo was going to become very, very important Tulku. And of course, he went on to establish the Tengye Ling, one of the four great Ling monasteries around Lhasa. And until today, the Ling Core, as it's known, the walk around the Jokang with one of the four Ling Rinpoche's monasteries being located in each of the four corners. And that's a favorite kora around the old city for Tibetans even today. So, and in old Tibet, then if a Dalai Lama passed away, very often one of those four Ling Rinpoches would become either regent or tutor to the new Dalai Lama or spiritual head of Tibet. It was quite common for one of those four to be chosen. In fact, the Demo Tulku was chosen twice in this regard. And throughout his life, the seventh Dalai Lama paid close attention to that Demo Tulku. And then when the seventh Dalai Lama himself passed away in, 1757, that Demo Tulku became regent and became the first tutor of the seventh Dalai Lama and of the eighth Dalai Lama. And so later, so that was the first tutor, and then later, when he passed away some years later, then Sechok Ling, another of the four Lings, became tutor. Sechok Ling Yishi Gyaltsen is his name. So in that way, those two Lings, you could say, played very important roles in the life of the retraining of the seventh when he passed away and became the eighth Dalai Lama. The poem by these kind of poems, often they have at the end a kind of a colophon, if you will, which often says who requested the poem and the circumstances of how it's written and so forth. And so I'll just read my translation of that here. So with that book, first came with Songs of Spiritual Transformation, and later we translated it, published it as this, Meditations to Transform the Mind, because the set is called Lamrim, Tunlogjong, Nyamgyurtan Sigchu Chepa. So Lamrim, in other words, Stages of Enlightenment, and Lojong, Mind Transformation. Nyamgar, songs talking about that process or expressing the joys of that process of the stages of enlightenment and mind transformation technology. The songs of experience and or mystical songs, you could say. And then Sigtsuche, advice on those two themes, Lamrim and Lojong, written by the seventh for various disciples. And the colophon says, once when Demo Tulku was sitting with the seventh Dalai Lama, he requested the Gyalwa Rinpoche, thus they used to call Gyalwa Rinpoche, to write him a short teaching. Gyalwa Rinpoche paused for a moment and then spontaneously composed this song. In other words, when the seventh wrote it, he wrote it sort of without hesitation. And usually when it says that word spontaneous, Lenkia, that means also later didn't edit it and play with it a lot. The poem is in that style of poetry known as Tibetan as kaka, or nkashe, nkasigche, kakasigche, meaning each word, each line of the poem begins with a subsequent letter of the alphabet. I translated a second poem like that and did it as though into English, like with the first syllable beginning with A, and the second with B, and the third with C, and the fourth with D. A wise man like me, and so on, for A. So, but here I didn't. I just put the Tibetan syllable ka, and then put in brackets why it starts with ka and how it goes. So the poem is a song of advice to the young Demo, who later in life becomes one of the seventh Dalai Lama's 2 or 3 main disciples, and certainly his main Tibetan disciple, main Tibetan spiritual heir, you could say. The other great disciple of the seventh was Rope Dorje, Chankya Rope Dorje, the great Mongol Lama Chankya, who is also a tutor to the Manchu-Mongol royal family. These days we often think of Manchus as Chinese. He was a Chinese Manchu. There are no such thing as Chinese Manchus, other than, I suppose, if some Manchus married Chinese and their children would be half or part Chinese. The Manchus invaded China from north of the Great Wall, in other words, the Great Wall dividing China from the Mongol nations to the north. In those times, in the time of 3rd, 4th, 5th Dalai Lamas, there were a dozen or so Mongol nations, but 3 great ones. The centrals, which are the Khalkha, written Khalkha, but the Mongols pronounce KH as Ha. So Halk, like that, the Halk Mongols. To the west, the Zungar Mongols, and to the east, the Manchu Mongols. These 3 great nations at different times held varying levels of strength and prestige within the Mongol world, and because the Mongols were all Tibetan Buddhists, then also within the Tibetan Buddhist world. All 3 of those, by the way, were traditionally from about 1500 or so became mainly Gelugpa and student and disciples or devotees, if you will, of the Dalai Lamas of Tibet, looking to the Dalai Lamas as their great inspiration. And so here, the Rope Dorje, the Manchu Mongol, became one of the great tantric recipients, like of Yamantaka Tantra and also Chakrasambhara Tantra. But the Demos became holders of many other lineages, and of course also held those lineages and transmitted them in their own lines throughout central Tibet. So the sign is the style is known as Sigche, as Ka Sigche in Tibetan, like alphabetical poem or alphabetical song, and I guess I don't unfortunately have a copy of the Tibetan with me. I thought I might have it on my laptop, and I tried to go on the tbrc.org website, the website created by Gene Smith for all of the 20 or 30 million pages of Tibetan text that he had scanned, but I couldn't find it on that site. I do have a copy in my collection of the 7th Dalai Lama books, which I have elsewhere, not with me on the road as I'm traveling on this 3-month, 25-city teaching tour. So here I can only rely upon the English and the English version. And I'll talk a little bit about the words the seventh Dalai Lama gave at that time, words of advice that the seventh Dalai Lama gave to the young Demo Tulku, and that the young Demo Tulku took to heart and used as a basis of becoming one of the greatest masters of his generation. In my book, by the way, I say fourth or fifth Dalai Lama, fourth or fifth Demo Tulku, depending on how one counts. One reason for that is the early days of Gelugpa, the Tsongkhapa did not put in place a Tulku system. And so then great lamas were sort of informally referred to as he is a reincarnation of such and such a person. But they're not enthroned and given that name. So Baso Chuje, for instance, maybe 50 or 75 years after Tsongkhapa's passing, Baso Chuje is looked upon as being the reincarnation of Kudubje, but he's not actually enthroned as such, and therefore is not called as such. For that reason, with the Panchen Lamas, the first Panchen Lama in the traditional Tibetan way of counting until 1959 was Chögyal Gyaltsen, Losang Chögyal Gyaltsen, is called the fourth Panchen in the post-1959 ways of counting, when the Chinese want to push back his pedigree, so to speak, and take it back to Tsongkhapa, sort of because the first Dalai Lama was a direct disciple of Tsongkhapa, and them wanting to do that, and there being some literary sort of basis for that, historical basis for saying that, or numbering that way. So I think the same with Demo Tulku. And now just looking on the Gene Smith website, the tbrc.org website today, I noticed they only list the sixth until today. In other words, the seventh Dalai Lama's great disciple, who here we'll call the sixth, but perhaps was the fourth or fifth by the way accounting was done prior to the 1959 Exodus. And I couldn't really say further on that because I'm not sure. When I asked in Dharamsala from some of the senior lamas, when I prepared this book in 1978 or 9 or 1980, so about 40-some years ago, when I was a young, handsome man with golden hair flowing from my brows. We couldn't say. So either the fourth, fifth, or sixth, but I think by today's counting, certainly the sixth. But we can say the Demo, who was the great disciple of the seventh Dalai Lama, and who became the regent and therefore the first guru of the eighth Dalai Lama, the one who basically was responsible for finding and enthroning the eighth Dalai Lama and seeing to his education and welfare until the boy came to adulthood. So each letter of the alphabet, those of you who know who Tibetan, goes ka, ka, ga, nga, cha, cha, ja, ya, ta, ta, and so on. So I start just by saying that letter ka. And here the line begins with the word Kamala. And Kamala is the name of a golden lotus flower. So he starts by saying, from the heart of the golden lotus flower, ka. Ka in Tibetan means mouth. Comes honey, sweet to the mouth, meaning sweet to the taste. We would say sweet to the taste. Means when it lands in your mouth, it tastes delicious. So from the golden lotus comes the sweet taste of honey. But take note. I guess in today's world we say, but listen up. The scent of medicinal plants, kebur men, the medicine known as kebur. So, is to be found in the song of mine. In other words, my song isn't as sweet as honey. So he's saying to the young Demo Tulku, okay, you asked me to write you a spiritual song that will be meaningful and beneficial to you. So here comes, get ready. Now, it's not going to taste as sweet as honey, but it will be as beneficial as a medicinal herb, bringing great benefits to your health and happiness. Is to be found in this song of mine. And here the fourth letter of Tibetan alphabet becomes nga. So ngagi, meaning mine, this song of mine. Then cha. Do not give voice to meaningless talk, which is in Tibetan cha-cho, which literally means just babble. Don't just babble away. But cha, only to words that yield a measure of meaning. Cha-she literally means a part, but meaning a measure. In other words, don't just prattle away about nothing. Understand voice is sacred. Words you say are sacred. And so in Buddhism, often we say, like, of the 10 sort of negative ways, what is it? Three of the body, killing and stealing and so forth. 4 of speech, lying and speaking harshly to others and deceptively or lying. And the 4th, which is just babbling away, saying nothing, but just wasting time and words and distraction, babble. Don't do that, but use your words, speak wisely. And so that's in terms of your voice, and then when physically, leave behind all negative ways, which is jaka nagpo. So jaka means the things you do, nagpo, just dark, or leave behind dark ways and negative energy and negative ways of behaving. And stay constantly radiant like the full moon, nyage da, the moon, which is in full expression, something like that. So this moon, the full moon, is often used in Indian and Tibetan poetry as kind of a symbol of all things good. So the moon represents, for one thing is often represents bodhicitta, the bodhisattva mind of wanting to achieve enlightenment, to be of maximum benefit of others. The bodhicitta mind is like great compassion that is the very foundation of the bodhisattva path to enlightenment and so forth. In other words, with your voice, don't waste words, but rather search for meaning and express yourself meaningfully. And in terms of physical activity, stay away from negativity and base everything you do on bodhicitta, compassion, and the radiance of a full moon. Then for the teaching, the word ta, he uses the Sanskrit tathagata. I think often in the West people will say tathagata because they'll put the th as tha, like this, that, those, and these. Whereas French Canadians, I grew up in French Canada, they can't say this, that, those, these. They say this, that, those, and these. Well, that's how it is in Sanskrit. They say tathagata, so like a heavy H. Look not to the teachings of the Buddha, ta, well, like a tanyatsik, with superficial attitudes and mere words. In other words, don't just be a Buddhist, but look beyond words. I remember when I first met Dalai Lama and said I would like to train in the Tibetan meditative and spiritual traditions. And Dalai Lama said, well, of course, I am opening a school for that purpose, but we don't want people just to do this to say, I'm a Buddhist. We want people to actually achieve enlightenment states. And don't be a Buddhist. Try to become a Buddha, something like that. So here the seventh Dalai Lama is saying that 200 and, I don't know, what is it? 25 years before the present Dalai Lama said it to me, saying the same kind of thing. Don't look at the teachings as just like a formula or like a guideline to living, but look beyond the words. But from now on, dantane, so danta just means now, so using the word di in that way, practice the essence, and for na, cross the ocean filled with monsters of suffering. So this symbol is often used also in Indian poetry, the monsters of suffering, sea monsters of suffering, like that. As we cross our life, we live our life, and the first of the Four Noble Truths is to understand the nature of frustration, stress, anxiety, unhappiness, pain, and suffering. Understand the causes of those. Understanding the causes of those, when we understand that all experiences of suffering or happiness, pain, and pleasure come from particular causes and conditions, that means we have some control over that flow, don't we? So meaning is like that. So practice the essence and cross over the ocean filled with monsters of dukkha. Pa. And for pa, he uses paramita, meaning the perfections, or in Tibetan, parotochimpa. Learn the inner practices, the six paramita. And the six paramita here are often when we speak of becoming a bodhisattva or being a bodhisattva, living a bodhisattva life, entering the ways of the bodhisattva, often these are described as twofold. First, we want to develop the mindset of the bodhisattva, which is often known as Munpe Genjo Gisem, the aspirational bodhicitta, sometimes called wishing bodhicitta, but wishing is kind of a weak word in English. It's like, I wish I would win the lottery, or I wish I could do that, or I wish I could have the rest of the day off. Munpa here means something very deep in one's instinctual urge, in one's priority perspective. Something one really puts at the top of one's to-do list, one's bucket list, or something like that. It's generating the mindset of the bodhisattva. I like to call it mindset of the bodhisattva. In other words, one becomes a bodhisattva when one loves others as much or more than one loves oneself. One has as much respect for others or more respect for others than one has for oneself. One has much concern with the suffering of others as one does with one's own suffering, and so forth. So one becomes the mind of a bodhisattva, or the thinking of a bodhisattva, or the emotive panorama of a bodhisattva arise spontaneously within one's flow of being. But then one engages in the six paramita as the way of making that aspiration, or making that instinct, that impetus, making that strong and effective and real in life, making it an actual something. So one thing to say, I would like to be a bodhisattva. I wish others would be happy. I would like to have love and compassion for others. But living that love and compassion. So that in Tibetan is called Jugpe Jangchuk Yisam in Tibetan, which means the active bodhicitta, or practice bodhicitta, or practical bodhicitta. Bodhicitta in action, something like that. And those often they're put into 6 or 10, but the 6 is kind of a popular way of doing it, from always being generous with others in one's way of relating to them and in one's stream towards them, and always being ethical in terms of not trying never to harm others unnecessarily, and trying always to be good and kind to others, and trying to be wise with others, I guess you would say. Trying to be a role model of the bodhisattva way to others, to inspire others in kindness and in love and in joy and so on and so forth. Not to talk about these things, but just like for Dalai Lama, of course, professionally, he talks about these things in terms of if he's invited to give a lecture or do a television show, professionally he'll speak about these. But in action, just sitting with him and being with him, one has a sense of that basic quality. One has a sense of kindness. Same with the late Kyabje Gelek Dorji Chung. Just being with him, one gets to understand what being a bodhisattva means. It means having this sense in your presence that you do love others, you do care for others, you are kind for others, you are considerate for others. I don't think in all the years I've known Dalai Lama, or all the years I knew Kyabje Gelek Dorji Chung, I ever saw them once show any discrimination between rich person and poor person, good-looking person and not so good-looking person, smart person and kind of stoopy-doop person, high or low in the sort of social ladder and so forth. In terms of kindness, love, compassion, respect, and previous Ling Rinpoche, Trijang Rinpoche, these beings who were also my gurus in the 1970s, always equal. And the shila, or self-discipline, or discipline, or whatever one wants to call it, ethics of trying never to harm others, trying always to be helpful to others whenever possible, in whatever little ways seem practical. And patience, always trying to be patient, forgiving. It's very normal in kind of an ordinary, worldly person that if something goes wrong, they always blame the other person. It's your fault, it's your fault. In the Bodhisattva way, to try to see that everything that comes into one's life is part of one's own karmic cycle and has something to do with oneself. And the healing, if it's a difficult situation, the healing begins with oneself. It doesn't begin by trying to straighten out the other. It begins by one's own self practicing patience, forgiveness, tolerance, whatever one wants to call. Then Suntro, the paramita of joyous work, joyous effort, joyous doing. Learning to be joyfully spontaneous in everything that one does. And Jian, which the Chinese mispronounced as Chan, and the Japanese mispronounced as Zen, and the Koreans mispronounce as Sun, Jian, which means a kind of a meditative stabilization, meditative practice. Working every day giving some time every day to keep your mind in clear, calm focus, able to look into any one thought process or object of investigation without wandering all over the place or hysterically reacting to dramatic TV news or this hysterical situation or that hysterical situation. Being able to have a calm mind which has been stabilized through the power of meditation. Samten, literally in Tibetan translated as samten, which means stable thought or stable mind, but it often translated as meditation, because by sitting quietly and looking at the distance between oneself, the perceiver, and the objects of perception, one enters a kind of a stable or a firm ground or foundation of experience. And finally, prajna, the sixth paramita, the prajna, the perfection or the deepening of one's understanding of nature of self, nature of other, and nature of experience. So learn the inner practices. So he refers these as the inner practices. In other words, reading Dharma books or hearing Dharma lectures is all very nice. But unless within oneself one develops the actual bodhisattva mindset, one develops that inner respect for others, inner consideration for others, inner love and kindness toward others, and at the same time implements this, expresses this by means of the six paramita, then one has a superficial relationship with the Enlightenment tradition. One is basically following in the footsteps of the enlightened masters, but one is not necessarily going towards enlightenment by doing so. One is doing so only in a superficial way. How do we take it from outer, pretending to like love and compassion, pretending to like the bodhisattva ideal, pretending to be generous and ethical and patient and joyful and meditative and wise, going through the outer actions of that, but not cultivating inside. So he says to learn the inner practices, master the inner practices. Learn here also, the Tibetan word for learn here actually has a meaning of train in those inner practices. And also, he says, learn the systems of reason that are common to all the philosophical systems, parumatikpa. In other words, Don't practice Dharma or don't learn Dharma as an act of faith or a devotion. Of course, faith has some value. It is a positive mind in some ways in that it can lead to something good. Like if you have faith that eating healthy food will help you and it inspires you to eat healthy food, that's very good. Or if you have faith in the basic attitude that eating poison will not be good for you, could harm you, that will be a beneficial expression of faith. Faith in being any teaching of any tradition around the world, whether it's science or Buddhism or Christianity or Islam or Hindu or Taoism, Confucius, that may have some beneficial effects. But by itself is very limited and can go the wrong way. So he says, learn the science of critical thinking, I guess is the best way to say that. Therefore, the Dalai Lama often says, if there is a conflict between critical thinking about something and a particular Buddhist teaching on something, always follow critical thinking. If science and religion have a different take on things, don't immediately jump to the conclusion that the spiritual or religious text will in any way be more authoritative. And this isn't something the seventh Dalai Lama is inventing when he says that to the Demo Tulku. Buddha himself, before passing away, said, always be like an analyst buying gold, cut, burn, and test in every way for authenticity. Don't believe anything just because it is said that I said it. In other words, Buddha is saying to his disciples, I'm your teacher, I'm your guru, I'm your Lama, but don't believe something so just because I said so. Because many things can be true but meaningless, and some things that are true for one person would be true for another. For instance, if you live at the top of the mountain and someone else lives at the bottom of the mountain, I may say, walk up the mountain a half a kilometer and you will find the water supply just to the left off of the path. Well, if you live at the bottom, I said, if you live at the top, I'd say walk down the mountain half a mile and you'll find a spring of water just off to the right. So one you're walking up, the other you're walking down, one you're turning left, the other you're turning right. Words are only relevant to the peoples to whom they are said. There is no such thing as words which are ultimately true. And Buddha emphasized this. Nagarjuna says of the 6 qualities of emptiness, one of those is that is inexpressible. Infinity cannot be captured by words nor encompassed by the conceptual mind. So in terms of anything, philosophically and so forth, and people's ideas and Buddhist ideas or any ideas about anything, we should have a good training in, let's call it scientific thinking or higher logic or rationale or whatever one wishes to call it. But without that, we are basically just walking like lemmings behind the lemming walking in front, walking behind the lemming walking in front of him, all the way to the front lemming. And when that one in front falls off the cliff, all the others just follow. So if from the beginning we follow this advice from the Buddha, and this advice has been given here by the seventh Dalai Lama to Demo Tulku, always be very follow the principles of great scientific inquiry and analysis as taught by the great masters of India. Basically, he's referring to Dignaga and Dharmakirti and all of the so-called the Pramana literature of India, that this was very important. And he tells them, pay special attention to these, gain fame in them, even to the Western lands. And Basam Jishing, this is the continent in the West. So I don't know, future historians may look back and say, oh, dang, there's the seventh Dalai Lama prophesying that the Demo Tulku was going to end up in the Midwest. Basan Jushing, of the four lands, south, north, east, west, the four continents surrounding Mount Meru. One is the Basan Jushing, the land where the bison roam freely. So it's where by Indian legend, in this continent, North American, the land of the West, nobody owned anything. All things just roam free, and humans just live there without claiming, this is my little patch of land, and this is your little patch of land, and this is my cow, and this is your cow. That nothing was claimed by the humans. I remember reading something where with the Iroquois, when they signed or sold tracts of land, it became a point of treaty dispute later because the Iroquois understanding was right of residence, not right of ownership or title forever. But as long as you were on it, you had the right to stay there. So if I gave you a piece of land, it's yours as long as you live in it. Once you get up and go away, that's it, it's gone. So it's a little bit like musical chairs, you could say. So anyway, the Demo Tulku should gain fame in this very deep critical thinking or pramana thinking, scientific thinking and presentation of the Dharma, even in the great western lands of the unowned bison. And do that in order to tame the minds of all beings without exception. So here, so those are like pa is like parol to take ba is bashang jushing, Basan Juling, rather, and Ma is Malu, without exception. So there he's talking, in the beginning he's talking a lot about the Bodhisattva way and the Sutra teachings. In other words, don't do so in a simple, superficial way, but generate the actual bodhicitta and engage or master the practice or live the practice of the six paramita. So he's saying that about Sutra. Now he moves on to Tantra. So the hallmark of the Kadampa, and therefore New Kadampa, the Gelugpa tradition in Tibet, the Gelugpa, when Tsongkhapa first founded it, some people referred to it as Kadam Sarma, the New Kadampas, because they used the Lamrim and Atisha's basic attitude towards Sutra and Tantra as their foundations. And later they stopped using the word Kadam Sarma, or New Kadampa school, and they started using Gelug and Galug. Galug for Ganden monastery, Ganden tradition of Ganden monastery, and then they went on to change that and become Gelug of the joyful tradition. Then he goes on to Tantra. Even if your tantric practice is small, sunny. In other words, if your tantric practice is mere like a little sprout, a seed sprouting, even if your tantric practice is that small, nonetheless, strongly face all trials and challenges for tsa, the satrang lasok. Face them all. Use your tantra to face all difficulties. In other words, if you take the basic practice of Tantra, even if you're a weak tantric practice, by saying, say, for instance, in the present situation with this Chinese flu virus or cold virus or whatever you want, the crown, which is shaped like a crown worn by a king or a queen, number 19. If one sees oneself as medicine Buddha and one's body as pure energy and pure light and has a strong sense of living and practicing well, and that one's living, as like the expression goes, walking like a tiger. What is it Pabanka Rinpoche said? Walk like a tiger, fearless and with great bliss. And skip like a yogini. In other words, keep the mind as free and open and spaciousness as a yogini. A female practitioner often is said to be wiser than male practitioners. Coil like a snake. In other words, sit between the appearance of things and the infinity or the emptiness of things. Like a snake, able to lean one way or the other very easily. So there's a lot of hubbub about something, not to be taken up by it and just thrown all over the place, but sit between there and infinity, and like a snake be able to move very gently and softly between the appearance of things, in other words, how things are being sold to you, and their infinity nature, their beyond appearance nature. And finally, dance like a Dakini. The Pabanka says, dance like a Dakini. In other words, always be joyful and celebratory in everything that you do, regardless of appearance, regardless of emptiness, holding the wisdom of emptiness in your mind, and at the same time respecting the appearance of things, but taking it with a pinch of salt. The Uttara Tantra from Asanga says, keep one foot in nirvana and one foot in the world. With the wisdom of emptiness, the infinity of being, one's mind never leaves the sense of the non-duality of infinity. Nonetheless, keep the other foot in the world out of kindness, out of compassion. One expresses oneself in the world as in such a way as will be beneficial to others. So not putting a foot in nervously, but putting one's foot in very stridently with strength and great confidence, something like that. So even if your tantric practice is small, so the seventh Dalai Lama is saying this to the sixth demo, even if you're a young monk, you may not be so confident in your tantric practice. Nonetheless, face every difficulty with the tantric yoga of Lagi Naljor, of the deity yoga, seeing yourself as a deity, seeing others as emanations of dakas and dakinis, and embracing whatever comes with joyful play and celebration, like an 8-year-old child playing with another 8-year-old child, or like a 16-year-old teenager in love with a 16-year-old teenager and teenage S. And when you do that, then when you call Zashe to the Dakinis, their faces will naturally appear while they're. Then when you do songs invoking the Dakas and Dakinis, in other words, when you do Chakra Samvara practice or Vajrayogini practice, when you're used to relying upon your tantric practice to face difficulties, then they would naturally appear whenever needed. So that's his sort of main advice to the sixth demo. And then he just says sort of a few personal things. Demo Rinpoche, holder of the yellow hat. So that's for Sha. The sentence begins with Sha. And Sha Ser is golden hat or yellow hat. In other words, a Demo Tulku is one of the great Gelugpa Tulkus of that generation, and still in our time now is still one of the great Gelugpa Tulkus. And they're probably, because being a Tulku in Tibet, Tulkus sometimes would be a little bit spoiled. The seventh Dalai Lama, for instance, being a Tulku, being not only a Lama, but a kind of a Lama king, you could say, could have been spoiled by having all things provided that were needed. And same with young Tulku. So he says, Demo Tulku, holder of the yellow hat, don't think about food, clothing, or wealth. In other words, we need some food to stay healthy and alive. We need some clothing to stay warm and to cover our privates in places where such things are the law, or wealth. Don't take pleasure in idleness, which in Tibetan is arur. In other words, don't become lazy. Just because you're a Tulku and you've got attendants and you could just lay back and order them to do everything. Don't become lazy. But instead, yatrel. Yatrel here in Tibetan begins that next sentence with yatrel, which means inseparable. Inseparably practice, study, meditation, and contemplation. Tupa Sambhagampa in Tibetan. So do your study, do contemplation, and do meditation as inseparable activities. So this is kind of a famous saying coming from Lama Dromdumpa way back in early Kadampa days, when he said, whenever you study, you should also contemplate and meditate. When contemplating, you should study and meditate. And when meditate, you should study and contemplate. These three should be kept as inseparable practices. Then seven Dalam goes Ra, the beginning lesson of Ra, which is Ralug, meaning goats and sheep. Most people are as thick-headed as herd animals. They discard sincere advice as if they were hard, coarse wool. Lawatsub. but listen to the teachings so kind, shatsa, and helpful, wholesome like medicine, and an ornament upon this great earth. In other words, you young Demo Tulku, don't be lazy. Don't go after food and wealth and clothing and so forth. Don't find any benefit in those. But instead of those three, study, contemplate, meditate, and don't be hard-headed and don't discard coarse wool. Don't be like the sheep that discard coarse wool, but instead listen to the teachings that are taught by the great masters. And they're so helpful. In other words, the enlightenment teachings that are wholesome like medicine. And they're like an anointment upon this great earth, Satchen. It says, like a fragrance of then ha. He repeats ha and ah, the last two sentences in the verse he repeats twice. Like the fragrance ha, like the fragrance of sandalwood, hari tsenden. Like the fragrance of a sandalwood forest, ah, are the wisdom teachings on the meaning of the sound ah. In other words, ha, the scent of the holy Dharma, the scent of the enlightenment teaching is like a sandalwood forest. And the wisdom teachings which emanate from the ah carry that fragrance. And he repeats ha, ah. So onto beings now covered in hachang and heavy, thick darkness, may these teachings fall as a shower of divine nectars, amrita. So thus the seventh Dalai Lama concludes his song to the Demo Tulku. The Demo Tulku took these, ran with them, achieved enlightenment in that lifetime, became one of the seventh Dalai Lama's 3 or 4 greatest disciples, and became the one in charge of the search for the 8th Dalai Lama, and became the regent taking care of the Dalai Lama affairs in the minority of the young 8th. Then the 7th runs, this song is noisily uttered by one poor in practice. This I tell you plainly. In other words, the 7th Dalai Lama is being humble, saying he's poor in practice. He already achieved enlightenment by doing his very strong practice, but nonetheless he's showing humility is good. But I had an urge, a wish to contribute to the world, and it yielded this song of letters. O Demo Tulku, incarnate Lama of the Ganden order. In other words, you're a great Tulku in the Gelugpa order. That time there weren't a lot of Tulkus in our school, by the way. A tradition of countless accomplished masters. In other words, the Ganden tradition produced hundreds of great, great enlightened beings, perhaps thousands. So I pray that you live long on earth and release fast waves of enlightened energy upon beings as endless as space. So I will close with that and just read it as though I myself were reading it to the present Demo Tulku, rather than here the 7th Dalai Lama is writing it to his student, the youngish Demo. So, O Demo Rinpoche, who now lives in Ann Arbor, is based in Ann Arbor, you who are an incarnate Lama of the Ganden order, which is a tradition of countless accomplished masters, I, Glenn H. Mullin, pray that you live long on earth and release fast waves of enlightened energy upon living beings as endless, as limitless as space. So there I'll conclude my little reading, and sometimes we do some questions and the chit-chat at the end, but we won't today because of the present sort of people taking a meditative response to the insecurity of the present era with response to the coronavirus, the Chinese flu or the Chinese cold from Wuhan. It's a great, wonderful opportunity for all of us to take things a little bit easy for 2 or 3 weeks. In all probability, it wouldn't be necessary, but unfortunately, test kits haven't been put out, so people aren't really able to do much testing. And it'd be very wonderful, and people who just had a simple test they could do at home, right? And then everything would be a little bit more relaxed, and facilities aren't there to sort of handle that yet. So I think the present attitude worldwide, and I think it's probably a good idea, is everyone do 10 hours meditation a day and take the time to relax, read some great books, binge watch a few videos, like, for instance, many of Kyabje Gelek Rinpoche's videos are on YouTube. Many of Dalai Lama's are on YouTube, other great Lamas. You can do that for a kind of a auspicious way of unwinding, and just do lots of medicine Buddha mantras, Vaitara mantras, Amitayas mantras to boost your own healing and protective force fields and so on and so forth. So as the seventh Dalai Lama says in his poem, just like he requests Demo Tulku to live for long and to make great efforts to benefit all others, so we ourselves should try to live long and be as much benefit in our lives as we can to all other living beings. And so with each of you, I send that auspicious wish your way. Gyawa di nyurtu da shenreze wan tribune dro chikyung malopa te salagubar sho. Chenju samsho rinpoche ma ke pana ke guchi ke pa nyampa me pa yang. Kong ne kong du pelwar sho. Thank you.